The first time you nod off at depth, you don't jerk awake like you do in a car. You just keep blinking slower, and the capsule keeps sinking, and the ocean doesn't give a shit whether your eyes are open or not. I was about 4 hours into a 6-hour drop when I caught myself doing that thing where your brain cuts out for a half second, and then the world snaps back in. Except my world was a pressure gauge, a dim console, and black water pressing on the hull, so hard it felt like it had weight. I've been staring at the same numbers so long they stopped meaning anything. Depth ticking down, ambient pressure climbing, the temperature readout hovering just above freezing. The transfer pod creaked in these tiny, patient pops, metal giving in microscopic ways to a force I couldn't picture. Every few minutes the comm would hiss with nothing. Not static exactly, more like the ocean clearing its throat. "Stay alert," the dive supervisor had said over the intercom before we started the descent. "If you feel narked, say it. Don't try to tough it out." Yeah, sure. I wasn't on heliox like a diver, but you can still get stupid down there. Hypoxia, fatigue, CO2 buildup if the scrubbers aren't perfect. A long shift without sleep. The kind of tired that crawls behind your eyes and starts pulling strings. I slapped my cheeks hard enough to sting and tasted that recycled air, metallic dry, and faintly sour from the CO2 scrubber. I cranked the little fan in the pod, even though it just moved the same cold air around. I chewed nicotine gum until my jaw hurt. It bought me maybe 10 minutes. Then my eyelids did that slow drift again, and I saw it, just for a flicker like a shadow, sliding across the external camera feed on the right monitor. A shape where there shouldn't have been one. I blinked and it was gone. The sonar ping came back wrong. Not louder, not closer. Wrong, like the echo had teeth in it. "Okay," I said out loud because talking helps. "Okay, we're stopping." There was a waypoint down the trench wall, an old service module everybody called the last stop. Officially, it was Node K-47, a deep transit support habitat. Unofficially, it was where you docked if you were too fucked to keep going, or if your systems threw a tantrum, or if you needed to piss in something other than a vacuum bag. Nobody liked talking about it. It sat anchored into a ledge like a barnacle, halfway between the surface support ship and the listening station at the bottom of Challenger Deep. No windows big enough to enjoy the view. No crew roster you'd recognize. It was just there, a place the Navy pretended wasn't a place, with a beacon that pulsed a tired blue through the water. When it came into range, it looked less like a habitat and more like a rusted chunk of pipe somebody had forgotten to pick up. 2 docking collars stuck out the front like old gas pumps. Faded paint on a metal placard, letters flaking away. Last stop before drop zone, 70 kilometers. The beacon blinked, 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 patient as a heartbeat. I eased the pod in with the thrusters barely whispering, keeping my hands light on the controls because overcorrecting at depth is how you turn a smooth approach into a very expensive accident report. The external camera showed the docking collar yawning open, edges furred with mineral buildup and little white worms waving in the current like hair. The latches clunked, deep and final. The pod shuddered as it seated. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Docking procedure. Equalize. Pressure check. Confirm seals. The airlock light flicked from red to amber, then green. The comm crackled. A voice came through, low and worn, like it had been dragged through salt. "Transfer pod, you gonna come in? Or you gonna nap out there?" I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Coming in. Give me a second." The inner hatchway was cold through my gloves. I spun it, felt the seal release, and the door swung inward with a slow reluctance. Damp air hit my face immediately, briny, oily, and stale, like the inside of an old dive helmet. Condensation beaded on every surface. Somewhere inside the module, water dripped in a steady rhythm, even though nothing at that depth should be dripping. Everything should either be sealed tight or completely flooded. There's no in-between. I stepped through, boots clanging on grating, and pulled the hatch shut behind me. The lock cycled with a hiss. A little pump whined. The air pressure equalized with a soft thump you feel in your teeth. Then the inner door unlocked. If you've never been in one of those deep habitats, don't picture some sleek sci-fi lab. Picture a gas station convenience store someone built out of submarine parts, then forgot to clean for a decade. Narrow aisles made from bolted shelving. Racks of emergency rations, chem lights, spare scrubber cartridges, thermal blankets, and vacuum packs. A corner galley with a hot plate bolted down, a battered coffee urn, and a stack of dented mugs that looked like they'd been fished out of a shipwreck. The lighting was harsh, almost fluorescent, but colder. LED strips buzzing faintly, making everything look slightly wrong, like my eyes were still adjusting from the deep sea dark. The whole place had that smell: brine, plastic, old oil, and something underneath it like rotting kelp. Behind a counter, yes, an actual counter, like you'd walk up with a candy bar, sat the attendant. He was maybe 50, maybe 60. Hard to tell down there, where everyone looks tired. Thinning gray hair that stuck up like he'd been running his hands through it too much. Skin sallow in the ugly light. Eyes bloodshot but sharp. He had a screen on the counter playing something with the sound down. Not TV, nothing that normal. It was an old sonar visualization, one of those waterfall displays that creeps sideways as time passes. The green lines crawled across black, painting the ocean in ghost strokes. He looked up when I came in, and for a split second his face did something I didn't like. Not surprise. Recognition. Like he'd been expecting me. "Evening," he said. "It's what, 3 in the morning topside?" I said, voice thick. "I just need coffee. I'm falling asleep at the sticks." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking past me toward the docking lock. "Driving alone?" he asked. The wording was so normal it landed wrong. Nobody calls piloting a transfer pod driving. But everybody down there copied phrases from old manuals, old jokes, old superstition. "Yeah," I said. "Just me. Station's expecting the sensor tech by 06. I'm already behind." He watched me for another long beat, then jerked his chin toward the galley corner. "Coffee's there. It's shit, but it's hot." I went to the urn. The pot was stain brown. The smell coming off it was burnt and bitter, but it was caffeine and I didn't have the luxury of being picky. I poured a mug and the steam fogged my face shield for a second. I caught myself glancing at the racks, as if this place might have snacks like a real store. There were protein bars, a jar of hard candy that had fused into one big lump, a box labeled patches, SDM/anti-nausea onto the counter. I grabbed a stim patch, the kind the dive medics hate because it makes your heart race and your hands shake, but it keeps you awake. I brought it and the mug up to the counter. The attendant rang it up on a clipboard. He literally had a clipboard with check boxes. He made a mark beside stim patch, like he was logging inventory in 1987. He kept glancing up, not at me, past me, toward the inner hatch, toward my pod. "You're running hot," he said. "Excuse me." He tapped his own temple. "Eyes. You got that glassy thing. You've been blinking long." "I'm tired," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "I'll be fine once I get some caffeine in me." He didn't answer. He stared at the sonar screen like it had offended him. Then, without looking at me, he slid something across the counter. A strip of waterproof paper, the kind you write notes on in wet environments. He'd written on it in black grease pencil, the letters hard enough to dent the surface. "You're being followed. Don't go back to your pod." My stomach did that drop like the elevator cable snapped. I stared at the note, then at him. He wasn't smiling. No prank face. No gotcha. "What the fuck is this?" I whispered because the sound of my own voice felt too loud in that cramped space. He lifted one hand, palm down. "Keep it low. Look at the monitor." He nodded toward a small wall screen mounted behind him. It showed an external camera feed. My transfer pod sat in the docking cradle, its lights casting a pale cone into the water. You could see the docking collar. You could see the mineral-furred metal around it. You could see the dark beyond, thick as ink. And you could see someone standing next to my pod. Not floating, not drifting, standing. A figure in the water, upright like it was planted on an invisible floor, right along the pod's starboard side. The camera couldn't catch details at that distance, but the shape was wrong in a way my brain recognized instantly. Human-shaped, limbs, head, dark clothing or skin, or something that swallowed the pod lights without reflecting. It was facing the habitat, facing me. My throat went dry. I turned so fast my neck cracked, and I looked through the porthole in the inner hatch, the one that gave you a view into the docking lock. Nothing, just my pod in black water. No figure, no movement. I turned back to the monitor. The figure was still there, perfectly clear on the camera feed. "What the hell?" I breathed. "It doesn't show up when you look direct," the attendant said. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor underneath that he didn't manage to hide. "Only on cameras. Sometimes on sonar if it wants you to know it's there." "That's not." I started, then stopped because I didn't have a good sentence. My thoughts kept sliding off the edges. "That's impossible." He snorted once, humorless. "Yeah, ocean's full of impossible." I leaned in, squinting at the monitor. The figure's outline jittered slightly, like the camera couldn't decide where its edges were. Like heat shimmer, except underwater. I looked back through the porthole again. Nothing. The water outside looked empty, but it didn't look safe. It looked like a mouth. "You're messing with me," I said. I wanted it to be true so badly it made me angry. "This has to be some sick deep station hazing thing." The attendant's eyes snapped to mine. "I wish. I'd sell my teeth for it to be hazing." He reached down behind the counter and pulled out a folder. Plastic, swollen at the corners like it had been damp too long. He slapped it onto the counter and opened it. Inside were printed reports. Not news articles, nothing topside. Incident logs, missing crew bulletins, photos of submersibles, diver profiles, equipment manifests, official letterhead, stamps, redacted blocks of black ink. For names jumped out immediately because everybody down there knew them. A pilot from a civilian trench tourism outfit, a Navy sonar tech, 2 rig maintenance divers who'd been reassigned to deep infrastructure. From the last 8 months, he said, all of them stopped here. All of them went back out after I told them not to. I flipped the top page with shaking fingers. The photo was of a small 2-person sub, recovered by crane, hull intact. The next photo was the inside. 2 bodies in their seats, eyes open, mouths slightly parted like they tried to breathe water through metal. The report beneath it said, "Cause of death, cardiac arrest. No signs of trauma. No huit breach. Life support nominal." "That's not real," I said, but my voice came out thin. "They log it as hypoxia, stress, decompression, whatever makes it go away," he said. "How are you going to explain something watched them through the glass until their hearts quit to a guy in an office in Pearl?" I swallowed hard. My tongue tasted like pennies. I glanced up at the monitor again. The figure had moved. It was closer to the front of my pod now, like it was taking its time, pacing along the hull. Not swimming, just stepping impossible and slow, like gravity worked for it down there. "I don't understand," I said. "If it's real, why can't I see it with my eyes?" He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It was defeated. You ever look at a fish and it looks back like it doesn't see you? Like our eyes don't mean shit down there? Maybe it learned a way to do that to us. A faint sound came through the metal under my boots. Top, top, top. Not loud. Not like a hammer. More like knuckles on a door in another room. I froze, every hair on my arms rising. The attendant didn't react, like he'd heard it 1,000 times. "Is that?" I started. "Don't," he said immediately. "Don't start listening for it. If you listen, you'll hear it everywhere." The tapping stopped. For a second, the only sound was the soft whine of the ventilation and the distant, slow ping of the habitat sonar. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "This is insane," I said, louder now because fear makes you stupid. "Why haven't you called anyone? Why isn't there a destroyer parked on top of this place, dropping depth charges?" He barked a laugh. You think I didn't? You think I didn't scream into the comm until my throat bled the first time I saw it? They told me it was stress. that I needed rotation. They told me to log it and move on. He leaned forward, eyes hard. And you know what? Maybe it likes that. Maybe it likes that we can't even make the people who own us believe we're in danger. I stared at the incident reports again. The photos, the signatures, the stamps. They looked real. Too real. I wanted to tell myself the paper could be faked. Anyone could print letterhead. Anyone could slap a stamp on something. But the names, the dates, the details, it all fit. The figure on the monitor drifted, stepped, right up to my pod's viewport. Its head tilted slightly, like it was peering into the glass, looking for my face. My chest tightened. How long does it stay? I asked because I needed rules. Humans will cling to rules in a burning building if you give them one. Usually until the first day watch, he said. When the surface ship runs the morning active sweeps. When there's enough noise in the water column, enough eyes on the line. It backs off. What if I just leave anyway? I said, and immediately hated how that sounded. Like I was challenging it. He pointed at the monitor with a stiff finger. Then it'll go with you. And it can what? Make me die by looking at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. It doesn't have to touch you. You ever been in a small room with someone who wants you dead? You ever feel that pressure in your chest, like your body knows before your mind does? My mouth went dry again. Are you saying if I stay in here? You're safe, he said quickly. It can't come in. I don't know why. Maybe it can't cross the seals. Maybe it hates the air. Maybe it's just rules. The tapping started again, softer. Top, top, like it was patiently waiting for me to decide. I looked at the hatch that led back to the docking lock. I looked at the note in my hand. I looked at the attendant's face and saw something there that wasn't trickster amusement. It was fear, real fear, the kind that lives under your skin. Okay, I said, voice rough. Okay, I'll wait. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction, like he'd been holding them up with effort. Good, smart. I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. So I just hang out at the bottom of the world and drink shitty coffee until the Navy wakes up? He didn't smile. There's a bench in the back. Couple old mags. You'll be fine. For hours tops. He stood and walked to the inner hatch. Something in my gut twisted, because the way he moved wasn't just going to lock up for safety. It was practiced. He spun the wheel on the hatch like he'd done it every night. Metal clanked. The lock engaged with a heavy final click. Then he slid a bolt across a secondary brace and clipped it into place. The sound of the latch settling made the air in my lungs feel heavier. He turned back to me. Just in case. Just in case what? I asked. His eyes flicked to the monitor. The figure was still pressed to my pod's glass like a stain. In case you panic and do something stupid, he said. People always do. I'm not a fucking child. I snapped because being tired makes you mean. He didn't flinch. Everybody's a child when the ocean decides to take you. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand the key. But the more I watched that camera feed, the less I wanted to be on the other side of that hatch. So I took my coffee and sat on the stool near the counter, close enough to see the monitor without looking obvious. The attendant dropped back into his chair and turned up the sonar screen's brightness. The green lines crawled. For a while, nothing happened. The figure stayed by my pod, unmoving. The tapping came and went. The coffee burned my tongue and tasted like ash. Minutes stretched in that way they do, in sealed spaces. Everything is too close. Every sound is too loud. You start hearing your own body. The swallow, the breath, the tiny clicks in your jaw. The stim patch warmed against my skin, and my heartbeat started to thud harder in my chest. It woke me up, but it also made the fear sharper, like turning up the contrast on a photo. Every few minutes I glanced at the monitor. The figure shifted positions. Sometimes it stood at the pod's nose, facing the habitat. Sometimes it was right against the docking collar, like it was trying to find a seam. Once, just once, I saw it raise what looked like an arm and lay its hand flat on the pod's hull. Not bang, not strike, just rest its palm there like it was feeling the vibration of my engine cooling. I hated that more than if it had attacked. It felt intimate. Do you see it every time? I asked finally, voice low. The attendant didn't look away from the sonar. Not every time. Sometimes it's quiet for weeks. You start thinking maybe you imagined it. Then a pod docks, and the camera shows a shadow standing where it shouldn't. He swallowed, and I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. Sometimes it shows up before they arrive, like it knows the schedule. That's not how anything works, I muttered. Yeah, he said, and yet, the tapping started again, closer this time. Not through the floor, through the wall, near the hatch to the docking lock. Top, top, top. My skin prickled. I stared at the metal panel, expecting to see it dent inward. The attendant's eyes remained on the sonar screen, but his jaw tightened. Is it knocking? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Don't call it that. Why? Because then it becomes a thing you can answer, he said, voice flat. And you don't want to answer it. My throat tightened. I did what he told me. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at the panel too long. I focused on my mug. On the way, the coffee trembled in tiny ripples when the habitat shuddered. Time crawled. At some point, I realized my hand was shaking from the stim patch and the fear, and my mouth tasted like copper. I tried to check my phone out of habit and laughed at myself. No cell signal. No GPS down there. Your phone is just a black mirror that shows your own tired face. The only time I had was the dive computer on my wrist. I checked it. 3:12. I stared at the numbers, then looked up at the monitor. The camera feed had a timestamp burned into the corner. 23:47. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were messing with me. The monitors still read 23:47. I leaned closer, heart thudding. The footage on the screen, my pod, the docking cradle, the figure played with this tiny, repeating twitch. A flicker of silt drifting past, a little bubble catching the light. The figure's head tilt. That happened again. Exact same drift of silt. Exact same bubble. Exact same head tilt. My blood turned cold so fast it felt like the ocean had poured in my veins. I looked up sharply. The attendant was watching me now, not the sonar. His expression had changed. The fear was still there, but it was buried under something else. Control. I forced my voice to stay calm. Hey, I said, what time does that camera say? He didn't answer right away. He just stood up, slow, like he didn't want to spook an animal. You should use the head, he said. His voice was different now, flatter, like he was reading from a script he'd practiced. I'm fine, I said. You've been holding it, he replied, and his eyes flicked to my legs like he was watching for movement. Go. It's right through that door. The timestamp is wrong, I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. That feed isn't live. He didn't react. He didn't even blink. He just stared at me with those bloodshot eyes. You saw the folder, he said quietly. You saw what happens if you go out there when it's waiting. Those reports could be from anywhere, I snapped. My heart was slamming now, louder than the ventilation. You could have printed them. You could have. Keep your voice down, he said, and there was steel in it now. Not fear, not warning. Command. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look away from him toward the hatch. I walked to the porthole in the inner door and stared through it. I didn't do the quick glance anymore. I didn't let my brain fill in what it expected to see. I stared until my eyes watered. My transfer pod sat there in the cradle. The water beyond was empty. No upright figure. No shadow hugging the hull. No handprint on the glass. Nothing. My stomach sank so far I thought I might throw up. I turned back slowly. The attendant was right behind me. I hadn't heard him move. You should stay, he said low. It's not safe out there. I took a step back on instinct. He mirrored me, closing the distance. Where's the key? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled a little. It didn't reach his eyes. You don't need the key. I need to leave, I said, but my voice cracked on the last word. Anger and fear mixing into something sharp. Open the hatch. He shook his head slowly, like I was being unreasonable. Not until morning. There is no morning down here, I hissed. His smile twitched. Not until the day watch. Not until it's safe. It was never outside, I said, and now the words were spilling out. That feed is a loop. You made it up. His eyes stayed on mine. Does it matter? Yes, I snapped. It matters a lot. He took another step forward. I backed up again until the grating pressed into my heels. You're tired, he said softly. You're narked. You're seeing patterns. You want to run. People always want to run. What the fuck are you? I whispered. His gaze flicked past me toward the back of the habitat, toward the door he'd pointed at for the bathroom. You should go use the head, he repeated, and his voice had that same flat calm. Then we'll talk. A chill crawled up my spine. I didn't turn my back on him, but I also couldn't stay pressed against the hatch like a trapped animal. So I sidestepped, keeping my eyes on his, and moved toward the back door. My hand found the handle. It was cold and damp. I yanked it open and stepped through. It wasn't a bathroom. It was a storage space. Dimmer light. One bare bulb in a cage, swinging slightly with the habitat's vibration. The air in there was worse, thicker with mold, brine, and something sweet rotten like old fish left in a bucket too long. Shelves lined the walls. Plastic bins, pelican cases, vacuum seal bags stacked like bricks. And on the shelves were boxes. Dozens of them, each one labeled with a date in grease pencil. July 18th, August 2nd, September 11th, October 29th. I stared, my brain trying to pretend it didn't understand. My hand moved on its own. I grabbed the nearest box and popped the latches. Inside was a dive computer with a cracked faceplate. A set of keys, actual keys, ridiculous down here like someone had carried them out of habit. A laminated ID tag on a lanyard. The photo showed a man with a shaved head and a tired smile. I recognized him from the folder. The Navy sonar tech. My mouth went numb. I opened another box with shaking fingers. A wedding ring. A cheap waterproof camera. A little folded paper with someone's handwriting on it, blurred by moisture. Another ID tag. A woman this time. Dark hair pulled back. The civilian pilot. My stomach flipped. I gripped the shelf to keep myself upright. He hadn't been warning them. He'd been taking them. I heard a sound behind me, soft like rubber on metal. I turned. The attendant stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. He wasn't holding a key. He was holding a length of cord. Not rope, not even proper line. A thick strap used to lash down cargo, with a buckle heavy enough to crack bone. His face looked almost sad, like I'd disappointed him. They always figure out, he said quietly. But by then it's too late. I swallowed and forced air into my lungs. Let me out. He shook his head once. No comms down here worth a damn. No one's gonna hear you. And if you go back out there, he tilted his head toward the hatch, toward my pod. You won't make it anyway. You're full of shit. I snapped, but my voice shook. He stepped into the storage room, strap hanging loose in his hands like a snake. It'll be easier, he said, and now the sadness was gone. Now it was business. If you just cooperate. My eyes flicked around desperately. Tools, cases, spare parts. My hand closed around something heavy on the shelf beside me. A titanium pipe wrench, big and ugly, stained with rust dust and mineral grit. The kind you use on bolts that haven't moved in years. I wrapped my fingers around it and felt the weight settle into my palm like an answer. He saw it. His eyes narrowed. He raised the strap slightly. Don't, he warned, and his voice wasn't tired anymore. It was sharp. You don't want to do this. My heart hammered so hard it made my vision pulse. I lifted the wrench, elbows trembling, and for a split second, I thought about how stupid it was to fight inside a pressure habitat at the edge of the Mariana Trench. One wrong move, one cracked seal, one ruptured line. The ocean would come in like a god. He took a step toward me. I took a breath that tasted like mold and brine, and I swung the wrench up, aiming for the side of his head. The wrench connected with a sound I felt more than heard, like hitting a frozen log. His head snapped sideways. The strap slipped from his hands. For a second, he didn't fall. He just stood there with his mouth open, blinking like the lights had gone out inside him. Then his knees buckled, and he folded down against the doorway frame, shoulders scraping metal on the way. I didn't wait to see blood. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. Down there, dead, is a luxury you don't have time to confirm. I shoved past him into the main habitat, boots skidding on damp grating, coffee sloshing out of my mug onto my gloves like I'd pissed myself. The air in the main room felt even tighter now, like it had noticed the violence and decided to press in. The inner hatch, my only way back to the pod, sat there with the bolt and brace still clipped in place. I grabbed the bolt with both hands and yanked. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. He'd cinched it down like he expected someone to do exactly this. The clip was locked with a little pin, the kind you'd need a tool to pry out. I cursed loud, raw, and swung the wrench at the clip. The impact rang through the module, a sharp metallic crack that made my teeth vibrate. The clip didn't give. I swung again, harder. Something thumped behind me. I spun, wrench raised. The attendant was pushing himself up on one elbow in the storage doorway. His eyes weren't right anymore. They looked watery, unfocused, but there was still enough awareness there to hate me. He spat something dark onto the floor, blood or coffee, or both, and then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind you see on guys who've been at sea too long, who've had too much time to make peace with ugly things. "You're not leaving," he said, and his words were thick. Not like that. I backed toward the hatch without looking away from him, wrench gripped so tight my knuckles ached. "Stay down," I warned. He laughed once wet. "You think it's me?" That made my stomach lurch, because the tapping started again. Not at the wall, at the hatch. Top, 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 right on the other side of the sealed metal, as if something outside had leaned in and put its knuckles to my pod's hull, except my pod wasn't out there anymore, not in that feed, not with that loop. I stared at the hatch wheel, at the seam where metal met metal, and felt something cold crawl behind my ribs. I swung at the clip again. This time it snapped, not cleanly, more like it tore. The pin popped loose and skittered across the grating with a tiny tink-tink. I ripped the brace away, hands slipping on condensation. The attendant dragged himself forward, one knee under him now. He reached for the strap where it had fallen, fingers hunting blindly. "You don't want the ocean looking at you," he said, voice dropping. "You don't want it to learn your face." "Shut up," I hissed and wrenched the bolt free. The hatchway was cold as death. I spun it. The seal groaned. The door cracked open a hair. A stale gust pushed through, carrying the sharper smell of the docking lock. More rubber, more grease, that faint ozone scent from the locking motors. The tapping stopped. For a half second, there was only the ventilation whine and my own breath rasping too loud inside my headset. Then the attendant surged up to his feet with a speed that didn't fit how hard I'd hit him. He grabbed the strap, wrapped it once around his fist, and stepped toward me. His eyes locked on mine. "You're tired," he said softly, like he was talking a drunk friend down from a ledge. "You're scared. You think you're thinking clear. You're not." I didn't answer. I shoved the hatch open enough to slip through, then slammed it behind me. The lock space was narrow, barely enough to turn around. 2 doors, one to the habitat, one to my pod. A little control panel with 3 big, stupid buttons. Seal, equalize, open. And a key slot. Of course there was a key slot. My stomach dropped again. I rattled the pod side door handle. It wouldn't budge. The manual wheel wouldn't turn more than a fraction. Lock from this side. I punched the seal button out of instinct, like maybe the system would help me. A red light blinked. Insert key. I looked at the key slot like it had personally betrayed me. I slapped it like physical violence could make it stop being true. Behind me, on the habitat side door, the wheel started to turn. Slow at first, then faster. He got the hatch open again. I backed up until my shoulders hit my pod door. The lock felt smaller than it had a second ago. The air felt thicker, warmer. I could taste my own panic, sour and metallic. The wheel kept turning. The latch dogs clunked. I stared at the pod side key slot and forced myself not to scream. Think like a tech. Like someone who spent too long fixing shit in cramped spaces. There had to be a manual override. There's always a manual override. Even classified places have to plan for the day when the guy with the key drops dead. I grabbed the control panel cover and yanked. It didn't move. Screwed in. I lifted the wrench. The first hit dented the panel lip. The second hit tore the screws out like rotten teeth. The cover popped loose and dropped with a clatter at my feet. Wires. Relays. A mechanical linkage running down to the lock motor. And, thank God, a little brass lever labeled emerg release. I hooked the wrench under it and pulled. It fought me like it hadn't moved in years. My hand shook. The lever crept, millimeter by millimeter. Behind me, the habitat door hissed as the seal broke. The attendant shoved it inward. His face appeared in the narrow gap, half-lit, sweat shining on his forehead. He saw the lever in my hands, and his expression twisted into something ugly. "No," he snapped, voice suddenly sharp. "Don't you?" I braced my boots on the grating and hauled the lever down with everything I had. The pod side lock clicked. I spun the wheel. The door cracked open. He lunged. The strap whipped through the air and slapped my forearm. Pain flared hot and bright. He tried to hook it around my throat. I slammed the pod door into him with my shoulder, crushing his hand against the frame. He yelped, more anger than pain, and shoved back. For a split second, we were locked there, two idiots wrestling over a door while 7 miles of ocean pressed on the other side of steel. Then the pod door swung wider, and I fell backward into my capsule. I kicked the door shut with both boots and spun the wheel like my life depended on it. Because it did. The latchdogs engaged one by one with deep clunks. The seal hissed, then settled into that quiet, heavy silence you only get inside a closed pressure vessel. I sat there for half a second, back against the door, chest heaving, hands shaking so badly the wrench rattled against the deck. I thought about the storage shelves, the boxes, the IDs, the ring. I thought about the attendant's smile, and I thought about what he'd said. "You think it's me?" The external camera feed flickered on my console automatically when the pod recognized it was sealed. It showed the docking collar, the habitat hull, the dim blue beacon pulse, and it showed the attendant standing in the lock, face pressed close to the porthole, eyes wide and furious, lips moving. I couldn't hear him through the hull, but I could read the words anyway. "Stay." He raised his hand and tapped the glass with one knuckle. "Top, top, top." I flinched like he'd hit me. Then he leaned closer, and his expression changed. Not into fear, into relief, like he just remembered something. He smiled again, slow and satisfied, and pointed past the camera, out into the water. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to look. The camera showed empty black water, just silt drifting in slow, lazy spirals. Nothing upright, nothing human-shaped, nothing. I swallowed hard and told myself it wasn't real, that he was trying to scare me into freezing. I reached for the undock controls with shaking fingers and started the sequence. The pod thrusters hummed. The docking latches released with a deep, mechanical thunk that traveled through the hull like a heartbeat. My comm panel blinked, no signal. The acoustic modem bar stayed flat, like the ocean itself had swallowed the line. Of course, this node was always a dead zone. Too much rock overhead, too much interference. Convenient for him. The pod rocked as it pulled free. The habitat's beacon pulse faded a little as I backed away. The attendant's face stayed at the porthole until the lock's angle hid him from the camera. Then, as the pod rotated slightly to clear the collar, I caught a glimpse through the habitat's interior window, just a narrow slice of the main room. And I saw the counter, and the little wall monitor behind it. It was on. I don't know why my eyes snagged on it. Maybe because fear makes you collect details like you're building an explanation you'll never get to finish. The monitor showed the external camera feed, the same view of my pod, the same black water, and the figure. It stood in the lot of that underwater gas station like it belonged there, upright and patient. But it wasn't by my pod anymore. My pod was already pulling away in real life. On the feed, the pod still sat docked, perfectly centered like time had stopped. The footage was looping, and the figure had moved anyway. It stood exactly where I'd been standing in the storage doorway when I swung the wrench. The shape's head was tilted at the same angle mine had been when I realized what the boxes meant. It was watching that exact spot like it remembered it, like it had been there with me. The pod thrusters surged. The habitat slid out of frame. I sat alone in my capsule, breathing hard, staring at the black water on my own camera feed, waiting for something upright to appear. Nothing did. Not right away. I pulled the stick and angled along the trench wall, away from the ledge where the last stop clung. My plan was simple. Get distance, get line of sight to the relay buoy, get a comm link, and scream into someone's headset until they sent a security team down there. The pod's sonar pinged softly every 30 seconds. A little tick of sound in my bones. Ping. Wait. Ping. The first few returns were normal. Rock face. Empty water. A faint scatter of particles. I told myself the figure had been bullshit. A loop. A scare tactic. The attendant was a predator using the ocean's reputation like camouflage. That was enough. That was horrifying enough. I could live with that. Then the sonar returned a second echo where there shouldn't have been one. Not from the rock. From behind me. A soft, delayed return, like something large was moving in the water column just outside the beam. I froze, hand tightening on the stick. The sonar pinged again. The second echo came back again. Closer. I swallowed, tasting copper, and forced myself to check the aft camera. Just black water and drifting silt. No lights. No movement. No shape. My heart thudded so hard it made the camera image tremble. I told myself it was a false return. A bubble stream. A thermal layer. The trench does weird shit. The water density changes in ways you can't feel, but sonar can. I kept moving. The echo stayed with me. Not constant, just there every other ping, like it was slipping in and out of the beam on purpose. I cracked the comm again, voice shaking despite my best effort. This is transfer pod Delta 7 to relay buoy. Do you copy? Emergency. Repeat, emergency. Hiss. Nothing. Delta 7 to surface support. Do you copy? The modem bar stayed flat. The speaker gave me only the sound of my own breathing and a faint, distant crackle like the ocean was laughing. I swore and smacked the panel. The pod drifted slightly, and the sonar beam swept past open water instead of rock. Ping. The return came back. Wrong. It was too fast and too strong, like something hard and close had stepped into the beam. And then, over the hull, through the metal, I heard it. Top! Not from inside. Not from the habitat. From outside my pod. 3 soft knocks, like someone polite at a door. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the camera again until my eyes hurt. Nothing. I swallowed hard and forced air into my lungs. Okay, I whispered. Okay, fuck you. You're tired. You're hearing things. Top, top, top. Same rhythm. My hand shook so badly, I almost overcorrected the thrusters. I didn't look away from the camera feed. Nothing appeared, but the tapping didn't stop. It drifted, not like a sound moving through air, like pressure traveling through metal. It shifted from the aft hull to the starboard side, as if whatever was outside was walking along my pod. Walking. That word landed in my head like a nail. You can't walk in open water. You can't stand at that depth without sinking forever, unless you never needed buoyancy in the first place. I wanted to slam the pod into full burn and rock it away, but you can't just slam anything down there. Full burn makes noise. Full burn makes cavitation. Full burn lights you up on every listening system in the trench. If this thing was tied to sonar, tied to cameras, tied to being noticed, I didn't want to scream my location into the water. The tapping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse, because it made room for my imagination. The sonar pinged again. The second echo came back, right on top of the first, close enough that the system almost couldn't separate it from the whole return. It was right behind me. I finally did what the attendant told me not to do. I started listening for it, and I heard it everywhere. Not just a knock. A faint scrape like a nail dragged across paint. A soft, what sounded like a hand sliding over metal. A slow creak that didn't match the pod's normal pressure groans. I felt like I could taste the ocean through the seal. I forced myself to keep moving, one careful correction at a time, following the trench wall toward the relay buoy's depth band. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Minutes passed like hours. Then the motor bar jumped. A thin line of signal crawled up the screen like a breath. The speaker crackled, and a voice punched through, tinny, distorted, but human. 7. This is surface support echo. Repeat last. You're breaking up. I almost cried. My voice came out harsh. Echo. This is Delta 7. I docked at node K, 47, last stop. Attendant attacked me. There are personal effects, evidence of multiple missing crew. I need security and retrieval. I'm en route to Station Theta, but I swallowed hard. I've got something on my sonar. Unknown contact shadowing me. A pause. Static. Then a different voice, calmer, clipped. Delta 7. This is Control. Confirm you are clear of K. 47. Affirmative, I said. I'm clear. I'm moving. Contact is still. I glanced at the sonar screen, throat tightening, still tracking. Delta 7. Reduce comm chatter, Control said. Maintain heading to Theta. We are dispatching an escort asset. Can you hold position if needed? Hold position. Like I was parked on a shoulder. My mouth went dry. Negative, I said. I'm not stopping out here. Control didn't answer right away. When they did, their tone was different, like they were choosing words. Delta 7. Theta reports no scheduled arrival from you. What? I snapped. Repeat, Control said. Theta has no schedule. You are not on their board. Cold crawled at my back. That's bullshit, I said. I'm on the roster. Sensor tech replacement. I have the assignment in I stopped. My phone was a black mirror. My digital orders were on an internal system, not accessible down here. Control's voice stayed steady. Delta 7, provide your authorization code. I stared at the panel. My mind went blank. Codes lived on secure comms. Not in my head. Not at 3 in the morning after a fight in a wet metal box. I don't have it, I said, voice cracking with anger. I'm not a fucking officer. I'm a contractor. You have my ID. You can see my transponder. Another pause. A faint murmur on their end, as if they'd muted and were talking to someone else. Then Control came back, quieter. Delta 7, your transponder is inconsistent. We are reading you at K, 47. My blood ran cold. No, you're not, I said immediately. I'm clear. I'm 5 clicks out and moving. Control's reply was soft, like they didn't want to spook me. Delta 7, the last valid ping from your transponder is at K, 47. We are not tracking a departure. I stared at the transponder light on my console. It blinked like it always did. Steady. Normal. I looked at my own external camera feed again. Black water, trench wall slipping by. I looked at the sonar, 2 echoes, 1 hull return, and 1 tight behind me like a shadow. I swallowed hard. Then your system's wrong, I said, but my voice didn't have conviction anymore. I'm telling you I'm out here. Control didn't argue. They shifted into procedure. Delta 7, keep your external cams recording. Do not attempt to return to K, 47. Maintain slow ascent to relay buoy band. Escort asset is deploying. How long? I asked before I could stop myself. Control ignored the question like they always do when they don't want to answer it. Delta 7, confirm you are alone aboard. Yes, I said, voice tight. I'm alone. Copy, Control said. Delta 7, if you experience hypoxia symptoms or disorientation. I'm not narked, I snapped. I know what I saw. Control didn't respond to that. They just repeated, maintain heading. Keep comm open as able. The signal faded again, crackling out like a dying fire. I sat there in the dim capsule, surrounded by the soft hum of life support and the slow, patient creak of the hull. Top, top, top. It started again, this time on the viewport, right in front of my face. I jerked back so hard my shoulder hit the seat frame. My breath came fast and hot inside my mask. I stared at the glass, expecting a handprint to bloom out of nowhere. Nothing, just the black. But the tapping continued, steady and polite, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. I raised the external camera's brightness. The image grainy, green-blue noise filling the screen. Still nothing. The sonar pinged. The second echo came back, so close it might as well have been touching my hull. I felt a pressure in my chest. Not like the ocean outside, like something inside me was tightening, squeezing slow. I realized with a sick jolt that my hands were trembling even when I wasn't moving them. My heart was racing and my mouth was dry and my vision felt narrow. Panic, sure, but also something else. Like the feeling you get when your CO2 rises and you don't realize it until you're dizzy and angry and you want to claw your own skin off. I glanced at the life support readout. CO2, 0.8%. Normal. 20.9%. Normal. Scrubber. Active. Normal. Everything normal. Except my body was telling me it wasn't. Top. Then the tapping stopped and the pressure in my chest eased just a hair, like someone had loosened their grip. A thought slid into my head, slick and awful. It's not trying to break in. It's trying to get your attention. I forced myself to speak because silence was making it worse. Okay, I said out loud, voice shaking. Okay, you're out there. What do you want? The words felt stupid the second they left my mouth. The sonar pinged again. This time the return wasn't just a second echo. It painted a shape. Not clear, not clean, but big. A vertical smear of hard return right behind my pod, upright in the water column like a pillar. And it was moving with me. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then the pod's aft camera flickered. Just for a second, the noise cleared and the black water behind me looked less like a void and more like a surface, like a dark glass panel reflecting something. And in that reflection, I saw it. Not a fish, not a squid, not a diver. A human outline, upright, right behind my pod, close enough that if the water were air, it would have been breathing down my neck. Its face wasn't a face. It was just a darker patch where a face should be, like a gap in the world. I blinked hard. The image snapped back to noise. I sat there, shaking, and felt something crawl up my throat that wasn't words. Then the comm bar jumped again. A voice burst through, urgent. Delta 7, this is Escort 1. We have you on passive. Hold course. Do not alter heading. I almost sobbed with relief. Escort 1, I said, voice breaking. Thank God. I've got something behind me. I swallowed, tasting metal. It's knocking on my hull. A pause. Then, Delta 7, we do not have any additional contact on your 6. Maintain heading. It's there, I hissed. It's fucking there. Delta 7, Escort 1 said, steady and firm. Keep your eyes forward. Do not fixate on your external cams. My stomach twisted. What? I whispered. Another pause. Then, softer, because you'll start seeing it even when it isn't there. My hands tightened on the controls until my wrists ached. You know, I said. Escort 1 didn't answer directly. They just repeated, maintain heading. We are closing. The trench wall slid past on my starboard camera like a cliff of dead rock. The pod's lights barely reached it, turning the surface into a dull, matte gray. Now, and then a pale amphipod flashed through the beam like a ghost shrimp. I wanted to turn off the aft camera. I wanted to stop feeding my brain images to torture me with. But I couldn't, because every time I looked away, the tapping started again, soft, patient knocks traveling along the hull like fingers walking. Top, top, top. Each time the sound moved, my skin crawled because it meant whatever was outside could keep up with me without swimming, without pushing water, without leaving any trace on camera unless it wanted to. And with each minute, the pressure in my chest came back, a slow tightening like someone was cinching a strap around my ribs from the inside. I remembered the incident reports. Cardiac arrest. No trauma. Life support nominal. I remember the photos of bodies in seats, eyes open. I picture myself like that, slumped in this capsule, staring at the glass as something stared back until my heart got tired and quit. No, you whispered. I peeled the stim patch off my arm and threw it against the wall like it had betrayed me. It stuck there, useless. I forced myself to breathe slow and deep, try to keep my CO2 down, trying to stay in control of my own nervous system like I've been trained. It didn't matter. The pressure in my chest wasn't from my lungs. It felt like it was coming from the water itself. The comm crackled. Delta 7, Escort 1 said. Visual in 30 seconds. Keep steady. 30 seconds. That was nothing. That was an eternity. The aft camera flickered again. The noise cleared for heartbeat, and I saw it closer. Not behind me now. Beside me. Right outside the viewport, so close I should have seen it with my own eyes through the glass, not through a camera. And I did. The black outside my viewport wasn't uniform anymore. There was a darker patch pressed against it, like someone had leaned their forehead to the glass. I could not make out features, but I could feel the attention of it like heat. I froze, unable to move, unable to look away. Then, very slowly, something slid across the glass. Not a hand, not a tentacle, a flat, dark shape like a shadow with weight. It moved with deliberate care, as if it wanted me to understand it was touching the barrier between us. My heartbeat slammed in my ears. My vision tunneled. I thought of the attendant's words. You don't want the ocean looking at you. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't swallow. My chest tightened until it hurt. Then the pod shook. A deep vibration rolled through the hull, not like pressure creak, like an engine pulse. A light flared on my console, proximity alert. On the forward camera, a set of lights appeared in the dark water, bright, steady, human-made. Escort 1, a compact escort sub, all angles and thrusters, sliding into view like a guardian. The moment those lights hit my pod, the pressure in my chest eased. Not completely, but enough that I could inhale again. The dark patch on my viewport wasn't there anymore. The glass was just glass. The ocean was just black. Tulp! Nothing. The tapping stopped. The sonar return behind me vanished like it had never existed. I sucked air in ragged gulps and wiped sweat off my face with a shaking hand. Escort 1's voice came through, calm again. Delta 7, we are in position. Match our speed. We will escort you to relay band. Do not attempt independent maneuvers. Copy, I whispered. My throat hurt like I'd been screaming. On the forward camera, the escort sub moved ahead of me, lights sweeping the trench wall, making the rock look almost normal. Almost safe. Almost. We moved like that for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Slow, careful ascent into the relay buoy's comm band. When the signal finally stabilized, control came back, clearer now, less distortion. Delta 7, control said. We have confirmed dispatch of security and investigation team to K-47. Maintain course to surface support echo. You will be debriefed on board. Copy, I said. My voice sounded wrecked. Please make sure they search the storage room. A pause. Understood, control said. Delta 7, remain with escort. As we ascended, I kept checking the aft camera despite myself. Nothing. Just black water and silt. But my body wouldn't unclench. My muscles stayed tight, ready for a knock that never came. When surface support echo finally appeared above us as a pale smear of light filtering down, a huge shadow with running lights like distant stars, I almost collapsed from relief. The ocean above felt different. Not safe, exactly, but less crushing. They craned my pod up onto the deck like a piece of equipment, not a person. When the hatch opened and cold sea air hit my face, it smelled like diesel and salt and freedom. Hands grabbed me. Voices shouted questions. Someone shoved a blanket around my shoulders, even though I wasn't cold. I stumbled onto the wet deck and nearly fell because my legs didn't trust gravity anymore. A man in a navy blue jacket stepped in front of me, eyes sharp. Name, he said. ID. I gave it. He checked it against a tablet and frowned. You weren't scheduled. he said. I stared at him, exhausted rage flaring. I know, I rasped. That's what Control said. But I have orders. I have. He cut me off. We'll figure it out. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told them about the descent, the fatigue, the last stop, the attendant, the note, the monitor, the figure. When I got to the part about the looped footage and the storage boxes, I saw a flicker of interest in their faces. Not belief, interest, like a case file clicking into a familiar slot. When I told them he attacked me, they nodded like that made sense. People attacking people makes sense. When I told them the knocking followed me, their expressions tightened. The man with the tablet glanced at another officer. Escort 1 reported no contact, he said flatly. I don't give a shit what they reported. I snapped. It was there. He didn't argue. He just marked something on the tablet, then looked at me like he was studying a crack in a hull. We'll review your pod recordings, he said. We'll review K-47 footage when the team returns. When I echoed and my stomach twisted. He didn't answer that either. They put me in a small compartment below deck to wait. A makeshift interview room that smelled like mildew and coffee. A metal bench bolted to the wall. A vent that rattled with every wave slap against the hull. I sat there shaking, wrapped in a blanket, staring at my own hands like they belonged to someone else. Through the bulkhead, I could hear the ship's systems, pumps cycling, distant footsteps, the low hum of generators. And under all of it, like a memory my body refused to forget, I imagined tapping. Top, top, top. Hours passed. Maybe 3, maybe 5. Time got weird. I kept catching myself nodding off, then jolting awake with my heart pounding. A petty officer came in once with a paper cup of coffee and set it down like he didn't want his skin too close to mine. Team's on approach, he said, and his tone made my stomach drop again. Approach back? I asked. He nodded once. Yeah. Did they? My throat tightened. Did they find him? The petty officer stared at the floor for a beat, then looked up. K-47's empty, he said. I sat up so fast the blanket slid off my shoulders. That's impossible, I snapped. It's bolted into the trench wall. It's a habitat. It's there, he said quickly. The structure's there. Power's on. Beacon's pulsing. But there's no attendant. I felt cold spread through my gut. What about the storage room? I demanded. The boxes? He hesitated. That hesitation was worse than any answer. They found shelves, he said. They found bins. But they're empty. No, I whispered, and it came out like a prayer. He shifted uncomfortably. They'd find something. What? He swallowed. They found your coffee mug. I stared at him. The one you... He gestured vaguely, like he didn't want to say it. The one you brought to the counter. That's on this ship, I said, voice rising. I had it. I spilled it. The mug is at K-47, he repeated, and his eyes stayed locked on mine like he was bracing for me to swing. I went cold all over, because my mug was gone. I looked down at my hands. No mug, no cup, nothing. Had I dropped it? Had someone taken it? I couldn't remember. Memory is a shitty thing under stress. It edits. It skips. The petty officer took a slow breath. They also found the security monitor, he said, behind the counter. My throat tightened. And the feed was live, he said softly. Nosleep. I stared at him. That's not. I started, but my words died in my mouth. He leaned closer, voice lowering. Delta 7, he said, and for the first time he used my call sign like it meant something personal. They reviewed the external camera feed at K-47. A chill crawled up my spine. There's a figure, I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He just watched my face. Then he said, there was. My stomach dropped. Where? I asked, voice cracking. By the dock? By my pod. He shook his head, slow. It was standing in the storage doorway, he said, facing the counter, like it was waiting for someone to walk in. My mouth went numb. And the attendant? I forced out. The petty officer's eyes flicked away. They didn't find him, he said, but they found blood. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to steady my breath. "Okay," I whispered. "So it's real. So you believe me?" He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just said, "They also found something else." My eyes opened. "The external feed showed your pod docked," he said. "It shouldn't have. Your pod was on this ship, on deck, being downloaded. But on the monitor, it was docked." I stared at him, heart hammering. "And on the feed," he continued, voice now very quiet. The figure wasn't outside. It was inside the lock. My skin crawled. "He couldn't come in," I whispered, remembering the attendant's claim. "He said it couldn't come in." The petty officer's face tightened. "Delta 7, he said softly. It was tapping on the inside of the pod door. I sat there frozen, my brain refusing to process it, because processing it meant admitting something I didn't want to know. He stood up like he'd said too much already. "They're going to debrief you again," he said. "Different people. Higher clearance." "Wait," I said quickly, panic rising. "Where's my pod now?" "Secured," he replied too fast. "Where?" I repeated louder. He hesitated again, and I hated him for it. "Below deck," he said. "In Bay 2. "Take me to it," I said, and my voice wasn't a request. He studied me for a long moment like he was deciding whether I was dangerous. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said, "but don't touch anything." He led me through narrow ship corridors that smelled like salt and oil. The ship rocked gently, and every sway made my stomach twist. We passed sailors who looked at me like I was an infection. A rumor. A problem. Bay 2 was colder, louder. Machinery hum and metal clank. My pod sat on a cradle, still wet from the lift, water dripping off it in slow, steady drops. Drip, drip. The sound hit me harder than it should have. Water dripping where it shouldn't be. A reminder. A rhythm. My throat went tight. Two technicians stood near the pod with tablets, arguing in low voices. "I'm telling you the timestamp's wrong. It's not the timestamp. It's the whole fucking feed." When they saw me, they stopped talking. I stepped closer, eyes fixed on the pod's viewport. It looked normal. Just a thick glass circle staring back at me. My own pale reflection. The bay lights. "No," I whispered, mostly to myself. "No, no, no." The petty officer stayed by the door like he didn't want to come closer. One of the techs cleared his throat. "Sir," he said awkwardly, "we pulled your external recordings." And I demanded. He hesitated, then held up his tablet so I could see. The screen showed my pod's aft camera feed. Black water, trench wall fading. And behind me, faint at first, then clearer as the text scrubbed the playback. An upright smear of dark return, like a person standing in open water. My stomach clenched hard. The text zoomed in. For a heartbeat, the noise cleared. And there it was, a human outline, close enough to touch the hull, standing like gravity belonged to it. The bay around me seemed to tilt. My ears rang. I looked away from the tablet and stared at my pod's viewport again. Just glass. Just my reflection. Then I noticed something on the inside of the glass. A smudge. Not oil. Not salt. A dark, oval smear, right where a forehead would press if someone leaned in close. My breath caught. I raised my hand slowly and put my palm against the glass from the outside, matching where the smear was inside. The glass was cold. Too cold. Like it had been holding deep water inside it. The technicians shifted nervously. The petty officer swallowed. "Open it," I said. "No." The petty officer snapped immediately. "Absolutely not. Open it." I repeated louder, voice cracking. "I need to see if there's—" "No," he said again, and now there was real fear in his voice. "That pod stays sealed until command says otherwise." The tapping started, not on the pod, on the bay wall behind us. Top, top, top. Every head snapped toward it. The bay went dead quiet except for the machinery hum. The tapping stopped. A second later, it started again, closer, on the metal support beam. Top, top, top. The petty officer's face went pale. One of the techs whispered, "What the fuck?" The tapping moved again, on the pod cradle. Top, top. Like knuckles traveling, patient and polite, walking through the ship's bones. My mouth went dry. I didn't want to listen for it, but I did, and now I heard it everywhere. Not just in the bay, in the vents, in the pipes, in the faint creaks of the ship's hull as it flexed with the sea. Top, top, top. And then, very softly, the pod's internal speaker crackled. Just once, like a breath clearing. The tech holding the tablet flinched, so hard he nearly dropped it. I stared at the pod, the comm panel on the pod's exterior. A tiny light that should have been dead, disconnected, blinked once. Then again, a slow, patient pulse, matching the beacon rhythm of K-47. Blink, blink, blink. My skin crawled. The petty officer backed away like the pod might bite him. Shut the bay, he barked to someone off screen. Now, alarms didn't go off. No dramatic klaxons. Just doors sliding, locks engaging, people moving too fast. I stood there like a statue, staring at the pod's viewport. And in the glass, in the reflection of the bay lights, I thought I saw something behind me. Not a person, not a sailor. A darker patch where a face should be, looking over my shoulder like it was checking to see if I'd noticed. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because the last time I turned my back in a sealed place, someone tried to put a strap around my throat. The petty officer grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Move, he hissed. I let him drag me out, my legs barely working. As the bay door sealed behind us with a heavy, final clunk, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. They kept me on the ship for 2 days. They asked the same questions in different rooms with different faces. They slid photos across tables and watched my eyes. They asked me to repeat details until my throat felt scraped raw. At one point, a man in civilian clothes leaned in and said, very calmly, "What did you do with the mug?" I stared at him like he was insane. "I don't know," I whispered. "I drank coffee. I dropped it." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Like it didn't matter. They never let me see the pod again. They told me K-47 was being decommissioned. They told me the investigation was classified. They told me I was to sign paperwork agreeing not to discuss trench infrastructure with anyone, ever, under penalty that sounded like it involved prison. I signed it because I wanted to get off that ship and back to a world where water didn't press against metal and listen. When I finally got topside, the sun felt wrong. Too bright, too warm, the air too easy. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt exposed. Because up there, there's nothing between you and the sky. No hui, no sil, no heavy metal comfort. That night, in a hotel room near the harbor, I tried to sleep and couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure upright in black water, pressed against glass, patient as a tide. I got up and walked to the bathroom, turned on the sink, and let water run just to have a normal sound. The mirror fogged slightly from the steam. I leaned over the sink, splashed my face, tried to breathe. And in the mirror, behind my reflection, I saw the faintest dark oval smear on the glass, right where a forehead would press. I froze, water dripping from my chin. I raised my hand with shaking fingers and wiped the mirror. The smear didn't move. It wasn't on the outside. It was on the inside of the glass. I stumbled backward so fast I hit the doorframe. My heart slammed in my chest, hard enough to hurt. The hotel room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had shifted inward. The air tasted faintly metallic, like recycled pod air. I stood there shaking and listened. At first, there was only the distant sound of waves outside, the hum of the building. Then, top, 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 soft, polite, coming from the other side of the mirror. I don't know how long I stood there. I don't know if I screamed. I don't remember moving. I just remember the tapping stopping the moment I backed out of the bathroom, like it was satisfied I'd heard it. I left that hotel without checking out. I drove to the nearest inland town with a river and kept going until I hit dry air that didn't smell like salt. I told myself it couldn't follow me, that it belonged to the trench, to pressure, to black water, that what happened on the ship was contamination. stress, my brain pulling patterns out of noise. Then, a week later, I was in my kitchen pouring a glass of water from the tap. The glass caught the light from the window, and for a fraction of a second, the surface of the water didn't reflect my face. It reflected something else, an upright, dark shape, too close like it was standing in the depth of the glass and looking up. I dropped the cup. It shattered. Water spilled across the floor in a thin sheet, sliding toward the sink like it wanted to go home. And as the last of it trickled into the drain, I heard it. Talp, 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 from inside the pipes. So yeah, that's why I'm saying this out loud now. Even if it ruins what little quiet life I've managed to fake for myself. Because I keep thinking about that faded placard at K47, the joke someone painted on a classified habitat like it was a roadside gas station. Last stop before drop zone, 70 kilometers. I keep thinking about how the attendant looked at me when I walked in, like he recognized me. Like he'd seen my face already. And I keep thinking about the monitor, looping footage or not, because the part that still makes my stomach turn is the part that shouldn't be possible even in a world where a man can kill people in a trench habitat and hide it behind paperwork. The figure on the screen moved even when the footage didn't. It stood exactly where I'd been standing when I realized the truth. Like it was marking the spot. Like it was saying, quietly, patiently, I saw you. So if you ever end up on a dive crew or an escort shift or some shiny new deep program that promises big hazard pay and tells you the ocean is just another workplace, and if your descent takes you past some ugly little node with a tired blue beacon and a sign that tries to sound like a joke, don't dock. Don't go in for coffee. Don't use the head. Don't believe the tired man behind the counter when he tells you you're being followed, because that's the part that's always true. Keep moving, because whatever's down there doesn't care if you're awake or asleep. It doesn't care if you believe in it. It just wants you close enough to notice it, close enough to learn your face. And once it has that, it can knock from anywhere water can reach.